Inside the bustling weapons cage of an elite Marine Corps training facility, tensions were already running high when the old man shuffled in with his mop bucket. Recruits rushed to return rifles, instructors barked orders, and metal clattered like a war rhythm. But no one noticed the elderly janitor at first, not until he paused beside a disassembled M4 carbine laid across a bench. That tiny moment was enough to spark the insult that would set everything in motion. Three young Marines, loud, cocky, and fresh from qualification day, saw him looking at the scattered rifle parts. One of them snorted, "Careful, old-timer, don't hurt yourself. That weapon's got more moving parts than your hips." Another laughed, "Probably doesn't even know which end is the muzzle." And the third, eager to impress his friends, added, "Bet he thinks blindfolded assembly means putting his glasses on." Their laughter echoed through the armory, but the old man didn't react. He just kept staring at the rifle, his expression unreadable, his hands resting lightly on the mop handle. No irritation, no defense, just silence, like he had heard this same mockery 1,000 times and survived much worse than words. What none of them knew not yet was that this quiet old janitor had once done things these recruits couldn't imagine. But before the truth surfaced, things would get much uglier. One Marine stepped closer and tapped the mop bucket with his boot. "Seriously, old man, move along. This is for Marines, not whatever you are." The old man finally looked up and the recruits paused. His eyes were calm, too calm, the kind of calm you only see in someone who has walked through fire and made peace with it. But the recruits didn't recognize that look. Not yet. Instead, they doubled down. "What's the matter?" one of them said mockingly. "Never seen a real rifle before." Another scooped up the pieces of the M4 and dropped them dramatically onto the metal table, letting the clatter fill the room. "Here, why don't you show us how the professionals do it?" The old man glanced at the bench again, then at the room full of Marines who had begun to watch. The instructors ignored him at first. Most didn't even know his name. To them, he was just the quiet janitor who swept brass and mopped floors. But the recruits' voices were getting louder, crueler. "Bet he couldn't put it together even with the manual. Bet he doesn't even know what a firing pin is. Bet he—" That was when the old man finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "Blindfolded," he said. The entire room went silent. "What?" one of the recruits asked. The old man nodded toward the rifle pieces. "I said I can assemble it blindfolded." The Marines burst out laughing. The instructors turned their heads. Even the armorer looked up from his paperwork. Nobody knew whether to be amused or annoyed. A challenge like that from a janitor was absurd. But for some reason, the room leaned in. Somewhere deep in the facility, footsteps echoed, heavy, purposeful. Someone important was approaching, though nobody realized it yet. The old man reached into his back pocket and pulled out a faded black cloth. "Someone tie this around my eyes," he said quietly, and the entire weapons room felt the tension change. "Keep listening, and which city are you listening from? And if you enjoy the story, please subscribe for more." The challenge hung in the air like a live grenade, and the room reacted exactly the way the recruits expected. First disbelief, then laughter. The kind of laughter that comes from insecurity disguised as arrogance. But beneath that noise, a new tension quietly formed, one that none of the young Marines could sense, but every instructor in the room could feel creeping in at the edges. A blindfolded rifle assembly wasn't a party trick. It wasn't something anyone learned casually. It was a skill drilled into very specific men from very specific units, men whose lives depended on speed, precision, and muscle memory honed under fire. If the old janitor truly could do what he claimed, then he wasn't who they thought he was, but the recruits didn't know that. They only saw an opportunity to humiliate someone they believed beneath them. "Come on, old man," one of the recruits said, snatching the cloth from his hand. "You want to embarrass yourself, be my guest." His friend laughed. "Yeah, let's get this over with before he breaks a hip." A few Marines turned away, uncomfortable but unwilling to interfere. The weapons cage was known for being unforgiving. If you showed weakness, even for a stranger, someone remembered. One of the instructors, Staff Sergeant Hale, narrowed his eyes. Something wasn't sitting right. The old janitor stood like someone comfortable in uncomfortable situations. That calm, that posture. Hale had seen it in men who had survived ambushes and firefights, not in civilians hired to mop floors. But he said nothing yet. The stakes were rising in multiple ways. One, the recruits were risking their reputation. If the old man failed, they'd get a cheap laugh and maybe brag about it later. But if he succeeded, they'd be a joke across the entire base before dinner. Two, the instructors were risking their authority. If this escalated into disrespect or misconduct, someone would be blamed. Probably them. Three, the old man, quiet, hunched, seemingly fragile, risked exposing a past he had never intended to reveal. For years, he'd swept the floors quietly, content to let the world believe he was nobody. But in this moment, with a room full of young warriors jeering at him, something old and buried moved inside him. Something he hadn't felt in decades. The pull of pride, the demand for respect, the sacred weight of a skill earned in blood and fire. And for the first time, he allowed it to surface. The recruit tied the blindfold firmly around the old man's head. "Too tight," he mocked. "No," the old man replied simply. "Just right." He sat at the table, hands hovering over the scattered rifle parts, not touching them yet. One Marine whispered, "What's he doing?" Another replied, "Probably praying." But Staff Sergeant Hale watched intently. He recognized this. This was not hesitation. This was orientation. The silent mapping done by men who had once assembled rifles in freezing rain, in mud, in darkness, in helicopters, and in firefights where a single misplaced part meant death. The old man took a slow breath, and the room felt it. Inside the cage, footsteps grew louder, an officer approaching. Nobody noticed. Every eye was locked on the blindfolded janitor. The old man finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd once given commands no one dared question. "Start the timer." A recruit grinned and lifted his phone. "Oh, this is gonna be good." But the stakes had fully flipped. The recruits thought they were watching an old man fail. Everyone else was starting to wonder if they were watching themselves fail instead. The air grew still, his hands dropped to the table, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The old man's fingers touched the first rifle part, lightly, almost tenderly, like he was greeting an old friend he hadn't seen in years. The recruits leaned in, expecting fumbling, hesitation, maybe confusion. But instead, his hands moved with an eerie confidence, sliding each piece aside, mapping the table with quiet certainty. He wasn't searching, he wasn't guessing, he was remembering. "A staff sergeant?" one of the recruits whispered. "Is he supposed to know what each part is just by feel?" Hale didn't answer. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. He had seen this once before, during a deployment long ago, when an SFODD Delta Force operator reassembled a rifle in pitch black after an IED blast. It wasn't a skill taught in boot camp. It wasn't even taught in most special units. This was old school, Cold War era, quiet professionals. The old man picked up the bolt carrier group, running his fingertips along its rails with the precision of someone who had once inspected weapons in darkness, in jungles, in safe houses, under red lights in helicopters where lives depended on the details. The recruits exchanged glances. This is weird, right? Dude, he hasn't messed up once. Should we stop him? Like, is this safe? But it was too late. The emotional tone of the room had shifted. Where mockery once lived, something else crept in, respect mixed with fear. Even the sound changed. The metallic clicks of his work echoed like a rhythm only he understood. Then the old man spoke softly, still blindfolded. "You kids ever field strip one of these in a flooded trench, with rounds cracking over your head, with blood on your hands so thick you have to scrape it off the parts?" His voice didn't rise, he didn't lecture, he just asked a question, and it gutted the room. The recruits stared, swallowing hard. None of them answered. Before the silence could settle, the door to the weapons room swung open, and the Master Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, the most feared man on the base, stepped inside. Conversations died instantly. Everyone snapped to attention. "What the hell is going on in here?" Rourke growled, his voice gravel wrapped in steel. "I could hear chatter from the hallway." Hale pointed toward the table. "Sir, you might want to see this." Rourke stepped closer, irritation twisting into confusion as he watched the old janitor's hands. Click, slide, lock, rotate, snap. Every movement was crisp, efficient, perfect. "Why is he blindfolded?" Rourke demanded. A recruit answered, sweating. "We thought he couldn't do it, Master Guns." Rourke stared at the old man for a long, silent moment, then start the timer over. One of the recruits fumbled with his phone. "Why, yes, Master Guns. Ready. Start it now." The old man didn't even flinch. This time he moved faster. Pieces flew between his hands with machine-like precision. The clack of metal striking metal was hypnotic, a ritual only a rare few had ever mastered. Snap, click, slide, lock. The recruits' mouths fell open. This can't be real. He's not even hesitating. He's faster than our instructors. But the rehook wasn't finished yet. As the old man pressed the final pin into place, the rifle came together with one clean, echoing snap, and from the doorway came another voice, deep and commanding. "Where did you learn that trick, Sergeant?" Every Marine froze, because that voice didn't belong to an NCO. It belonged to the base commander. His boots echoed as he stepped into the room, eyes locked on the blindfolded janitor as though he were seeing a ghost from another lifetime. The recruits went rigid with fear. The instructors exchanged stunned looks, and the old man still hadn't removed the blindfold, but the shift had come full circle. The room no longer wondered whether he would fail. They were now terrified of what his success meant. The room went dead still as the base commander stepped forward, boots striking the concrete floor with a slow, deliberate weight that made every recruit's spine lock straight. No one breathed. No one dared move. The old man finally lowered his hands, resting them beside the fully assembled rifle, the blindfold still tied firmly around his head as if he didn't even need sight to know exactly where he was. The commander stopped just a foot away, studying the rifle, studying the old man's posture, studying the stunned Marines around him. Then, in a voice that carried decades of authority, he asked, "Sergeant, do you still remember the jungle method?" Every instructor in the room jolted. The recruits exchanged panicked glances, realizing suddenly that this wasn't just some old janitor. That word, sergeant, hit them like a hammer. The old man slowly removed the blindfold, revealing eyes that were calm, sharp, and far from fragile. "Sir," he said quietly, "I remember them all." The commander's face softened, disbelief and respect mixing into something electric. "Good Lord, it is you." The young Marines watched in confusion as the commander, known across bases for never showing emotion, took a slow step back as if seeing a ghost. "Marines," he said, turning his sharp gaze onto the trembling recruits, "do you have any idea who this man is, who you've been insulting?" None of them spoke. None of them could. The commander pointed to the rifle on the table. "This weapon drill, blindfolded, is taught in only one place. One. And only to operators who ran missions so deep their files are still classified." Ruck, the terrifying master gunnery sergeant, blinked slowly, the only sign that he too was shaken. "Sir, you don't mean—" "Yes, Master Guns. This is the man who trained my instructors when I was still a lieutenant. The man who ran recon in Panama, tracked insurgents in the Philippines, and disappeared off every roster for almost 10 years because his work didn't exist on paper." The recruits' mouths fell open in silent horror. The commander stepped closer to the old man, the janitor they had mocked minutes earlier, and stood at rigid attention. Then he raised his hand in a slow, crisp salute, one filled with a reverence none of the recruits had ever witnessed. Gasps rippled through the room. The old man, humbled but steady, returned the salute with perfect precision. The commander lowered his hand and addressed everyone present. "You children mocked a legend. While you were busy laughing, he performed a rifle assembly most special operators can't do anymore. You insulted a man who kept Marines alive in conditions you wouldn't survive for a single day." One recruit swallowed hard. Another took a step back. One whispered, "What have we done?" The commander wasn't finished. He walked to the table, lifted the rifle, checked it, and nodded. "Still flawless after all these years," he said quietly. Then he turned to the recruits. "You will apologize. You will learn from him, and you will pray you grow into even a fraction of the Marine he once was." Silence hung thick in the air until finally Master Guns barked, "You heard the commander! Move!" The young Marines scrambled into line, faces burning with shame, each waiting to speak to the man they had once dismissed as a nobody. And as the old veteran stood there, hands at his sides, the power in the room had shifted completely. No one saw him as a janitor anymore. They saw him for what he truly was, a ghost from a war they were never strong enough to fight. The recruits approached him one by one, their voices trembling as they apologized, not because they were told to, but because shame sat heavy in their chests. The old man accepted each apology with a calm nod, neither triumphant nor resentful. He didn't need their fear, he only wanted them to understand the weight of the uniform they wore. When the last recruit stepped back into formation, the commander motioned the old veteran toward a bench near the wall. "Sit, Sergeant, please," he said, the word please startling everyone. The old man eased down slowly, joints stiff but spirit steady. The recruits gathered in front of him, Master Guns and the commander standing respectfully beside him, almost like students waiting for a lesson. The old man picked up the rifle again, his fingers tracing the metal with a familiarity that made even the senior Marines watch with awe. "You think strength is loud," he began. "You think it's shouting orders or lifting heavy or talking big in a room full of people. But real strength," he tapped 2 fingers against the rifle's lower receiver, "is quiet. Quiet like the man who walks point so everyone behind him comes home. Quiet like the medic who bleeds so someone else doesn't die. Quiet like this weapon, silent until it's needed and deadly when it must be." The room hung on every word. No one blinked. No one dared to interrupt. He continued, "Your gear may be newer, your training rooms are cleaner, but this," he lifted the rifle, holding it confidently with one hand, "this hasn't changed. And neither has the responsibility that comes with wearing the eagle, globe, and anchor." The youngest recruit swallowed hard, eyes glistening. Another wiped his face. The old man wasn't scolding them anymore. He was teaching them. "When you mocked me," he said softly, "you didn't hurt me. I've been shot at, hunted, forgotten, and buried in reports that will never see daylight. But when you mock someone smaller, weaker, or older, you hurt the Marine Corps, and that's something none of you can afford." Even Master Guns lowered his head. The commander placed a hand gently on the veteran's shoulder. "Sergeant, would you be willing to stay a while?" Maybe talk to the platoon tomorrow morning. I think these Marines and all their instructors could learn more from you than any handbook could ever teach." The old man smiled faintly, the lines on his face deepening with warmth instead of age. "I'll stay," he said, "but only if they promise one thing." The commander leaned forward. "Anything, Sergeant." The veteran looked at the recruits, those same young men who had mocked him just an hour ago. "Promise me you'll never treat another Marine the way you treated me today. Not a janitor, not a private, not a stranger at the gate. Respect is the first weapon you carry and the last one you lay down. Without it, you're already defeated." The entire formation snapped to attention. In one unified, thunderous voice they shouted, "Yes, Sergeant!" The veteran stood slowly, gripping the rifle one last time before handing it carefully to the nearest recruit. "Then you'll be fine," he whispered. "All of you." As he walked toward the exit, the commander and master guns flanked him, not escorting him out but honoring him, while the recruits remained perfectly still, watching the man they once dismissed as a frail old janitor now leave the room like a warrior stepping off the battlefield one final time. And long after the door closed, the Marines kept standing at attention, because legends don't leave a room without leaving something behind.